Picture a cauldron large enough to hold 8 human beings, iron walls 3 inches thick, a diameter of 12 feet, chains bolted to the rim, trailing down into the vessel. Beneath it, a fire that has been carefully measured and maintained, not hot enough to kill quickly, hot enough to ensure that death takes hours, 13 hours, to be precise, and seated on a throne 30 feet away, forced to watch every moment, is the man whose entire family is about to be cooked alive. The year is 1615. The place is the execution ground outside the ruins of Osaka Castle. The man watching is Toyotomi Hideyori, son of the greatest general Japan has ever known. The man who ordered this spectacle is Tokugawa Ieyasu, and he is about to demonstrate exactly what happens to those who threaten his vision of eternal peace. What you're about to hear is how Japan's most powerful dynasty was erased through one of the most calculated acts of cruelty in human history. This isn't just an execution, it's political theatre designed to send a message that would echo through Japanese society for the next 2.5 centuries. And it worked. To understand why this happened, we need to go back 30 years, back when the Toyotomi name meant unquestioned power. When Toyotomi Hideyoshi, a man born to peasants, achieved what no one thought possible and unified all of Japan under his banner. Born in 1537 to a peasant family, Hideyoshi shattered Japan's rigid class system through brilliant strategy and ruthless ambition. In feudal Japan's rigid class system, this was supposed to be his entire life. Peasants remained peasants. The warrior class, the samurai, was hereditary and closed. You were born into your station and you died there. Hideyoshi shattered that iron law through a combination of brilliant military strategy, political cunning, and ruthless ambition that was bordering on genius. He started as a sandal bearer for Oda Nobunaga, one of the great warlords attempting to unify Japan. While other servants just served, Hideyoshi studied. He learned castle construction, military logistics, political maneuvering. He made himself indispensable not through martial prowess, but through intelligence. And somehow, impossibly, this peasant boy rose. When Nobunaga was assassinated in 1582, Hideyoshi moved with a speed that shocked Japan. He hunted down the assassin, avenged his lord, and in doing so positioned himself as Nobunaga's natural successor. By 1590 he had unified all of Japan, accomplishing what Nobunaga died attempting. The Imperial court granted him unprecedented titles, Kampaku and Taiko. He built the massive, impregnable Osaka Castle. He launched invasions of Korea, projecting Japanese power onto the Asian mainland for the first time. In every way that mattered, he ruled Japan. But Hideyoshi desperately wanted a male heir, an obsession that would doom his family line, an heir to continue his impossible legacy. As he aged without a male heir, this became an obsession. Finally, when he was already in his 50s, his concubine Yodo gave birth to a son, Tsurumatsu. Hideyoshi's joy was limitless. The peasant who became regent would found a dynasty. Tsurumatsu died at age 3. The grief nearly broke Hideyoshi. But 3 years later, Yodo gave birth to another son, Hideyori. By this time, Hideyoshi was 61 years old, ancient for his time, and his health was failing. He became paranoid, obsessive about securing his son's future. He forced every major daimyo in Japan to swear personal oaths of loyalty to the infant Hideyori. He created a council of 5 regents, the most powerful men in Japan, and made them swear to rule collectively until Hideyori came of age. On that council sat Tokugawa Ieyasu, and this is where everything really begins. Ieyasu was Hideyoshi's opposite in almost every way. Where Hideyoshi had risen from nothing, Ieyasu was born to the Matsudaira clan, descendants of the ancient Minamoto line that had produced shoguns. Where Hideyoshi was impulsive and emotional, Ieyasu was patient and calculating. Where Hideyoshi built the tallest castle, Ieyasu built the deepest foundations. Hideyoshi died in 1598, and immediately the careful balance he had constructed began to fracture. The 5 regents quickly fractured into factions. 2 years after Hideyoshi's death, Japan split into 2 great factions: the Eastern Army, loyal to Tokugawa Ieyasu; the Western Army, ostensibly loyal to the young Hideyori, but really fighting to prevent Tokugawa dominance. They met at Sekigahara in 1600, in what would become the most decisive battle in Japanese history. Ieyasu's victory was absolute. In a single day, he eliminated most of his major rivals, and established himself as the most powerful man in Japan. Most conquerors would have moved against the Toyotomi immediately. The child Hideyori was still alive, still technically the heir to Hideyoshi's legacy, still a potential rallying point for opposition, but Ieyasu was patient. He had the emperor grant him the title of shogun in 1603, establishing his own dynasty, but he left Hideyori alive in Osaka Castle, with generous stipends and all the trappings of respect. To everyone watching, Ieyasu seemed to be honouring his oath to Hideyoshi. In reality, he was waiting for the perfect moment to eliminate the Toyotomi with clear justification, to eliminate the Toyotomi permanently in a way that would make it seem justified, even necessary. That moment came 14 years later, in 1614. Hideyori, now a young man of 21, had rebuilt parts of Osaka Castle and gathered ronin, masterless samurai who still revered the Toyotomi name. Ieyasu, now 71 years old and aware his own time was limited, decided the threat had to be eliminated. He manufactured a pretext, a supposed insult in the inscription of a temple bell that Hideyori had donated. The insult was questionable at best, but Ieyasu's response was overwhelming. Ieyasu mobilized an army of 200,000 men. The winter siege of Osaka began in November 1614. Osaka Castle was considered impregnable, and for months it proved exactly that. Ieyasu's forces could not breach the walls. His son Hidetada led assault after assault that broke against the castle's defences. Winter turned the siege into a freezing stalemate. So, Ieyasu changed tactics. He negotiated. He offered generous terms. Hideyori could keep his life, his wealth, and his status if he would simply fill in the outer moats of Osaka Castle as a gesture of good faith. It seemed reasonable. It seemed like peace. Hideyori's advisors urged acceptance, and the young man agreed. The moment the treaty was signed, Ieyasu's troops began filling in, not just the outer moats, but the inner moats too. Night and day, they worked. When Hideyori's representatives protested, Ieyasu's men apologized for the misunderstanding, but continued working. By the time the Toyotomi realized they had been deceived, Osaka Castle's greatest defensive feature had been neutralized. 4 months later, Ieyasu broke the peace and attacked again. Without the moats, the summer siege breached the castle's defences within weeks. The final assault came in June 1615. Hideyori retreated to the inner keep with his mother, Yodo, and his infant son. The castle was burning around them. Tokugawa forces were breaching the final walls. In the end, Hideyori and his mother committed seppuku rather than face capture. The infant son was found and seized by Tokugawa soldiers. The Cauldron would erase the Toyotomi from history in a brutality designed to prevent all future challenges. From history in a way so brutal, so absolute, that no one would ever challenge Tokugawa authority again. The prisoners were gathered. Hideyori's infant son, barely able to walk. Hideyori's half-brothers and half-sisters, children of Hideyoshi's concubines. Their mothers, trusted retainers who had served the Toyotomi faithfully. In total, 8 people, ranging in age from 18 months to 40 years old. They were chained together and brought to the execution ground. The cauldron had been prepared over several days. Ironworkers had constructed it to Ieyasu's specific requirements, large enough to hold multiple people, deep enough that they could not touch the bottom, even standing. The chains attached to the rim were measured precisely so the prisoners would hang suspended, unable to escape upward, but unable to drown quickly either. The fire was carefully managed for maximum suffering and public horror, a message meant to haunt anyone who considered opposing Tokugawa, that it would haunt the dreams of anyone who ever considered opposing the Tokugawa. The Tokugawa chronicles document what happened next, with disturbing precision. The prisoners were stripped and chained. The infant was chained to his mother. They were lowered into the cauldron. The water at this point was warm, but not yet scalding. This was calculated too. Boiling water from the start would have caused shock and quick death. Instead, the temperature was raised gradually. The fire beneath was fed slowly, methodically. Witnesses, and there were many, because Ieyasu wanted this to be seen, described the progression. First came discomfort as the water grew hot, then pain as it became scalding. The prisoners began to scream, to beg for mercy, to pray to Buddha and the kami for deliverance. None came. Ieyasu had given explicit orders. The fire was to be maintained at a precise level. Not so hot that death came quickly, hot enough that suffering was absolute. The goal was 13 hours from sunrise to sunset. 13 hours to kill 8 people who could have been executed with a sword stroke in 13 seconds. The psychological torture was as calculated as the physical. One of the prisoners was reportedly Hideyori's younger brother, though historical sources debate his exact relationship. He was in his early 20s, old enough to fully understand what was happening, young enough that his vitality kept him alive far longer than older prisoners. Witnesses recorded that he was still conscious and screaming after 10 hours when the others had fallen silent. The mothers tried to shield their children with their own bodies, but the chains prevented any real protection. The water conducted heat evenly. There was no escape, no position that offered any relief. As hours passed, the skin began to blister, then to slough off. The historical accounts, written by men who considered themselves hardened warriors, described looking away, described the smell of cooking flesh, described sounds that they claimed haunted them for years afterward. But the most chilling detail in these records isn't about the prisoners, it's about Ieyasu himself. He was not present at the execution ground, he did not personally witness the boiling, but he had arranged for one specific prisoner to be kept alive until the very end, brought to his presence and forced to watch. That prisoner was a senior Toyotomi retainer, a man who had served Hideyoshi since before Hideyori was born. He had been captured in the final assault on Osaka Castle. Ieyasu had him brought to his headquarters and positioned where he could see the execution ground. For 13 hours this man was forced to watch the Toyotomi family die, forced to hear the screams, forced to witness the complete annihilation of the family he had served his entire adult life. Only after the last prisoner had died was this retainer brought before Ieyasu. The shogun asked him a single question. "Do you understand now?" The retainer, according to the chronicles, said nothing. He simply stared at Ieyasu with what was described as empty eyes. Then he was executed with a sword, quick, clean, merciful compared to what he had witnessed, and that too was calculated. Ieyasu wanted him to carry the story, but only so far. The tale would spread through those who had witnessed it indirectly. The horror would grow in the telling, and grow it did. The story of the Cauldron spread throughout Japan with shocking speed. It was whispered in every castle, every garrison, every gathering of daimyo. The message was crystal clear. This is what happens to those who oppose Tokugawa, not just to you, to your entire family line, to everyone you love, and it will not be quick. The Tokugawa shogunate would rule Japan for the next 250 years. From 1615 until 1868, not a single major rebellion succeeded. Not a single daimyo seriously challenged Tokugawa authority. The Pax Tokugawa, the Great Peace, was built on many things: clever political structures, hostage systems, economic controls. But it was also built on the memory of that cauldron. Modern historians analysing this event have noted something profoundly disturbing. The execution was, in its own horrific way, effective. By making the annihilation of the Toyotomi so brutal, so public, so absolute, Ieyasu created a deterrent more powerful than any army. The cost was 8 lives and the complete corruption of any concept of mercy or honour. The benefit was 2.5 centuries without major civil war. This raises questions that have no comfortable answers. Can brutality be justified if it prevents greater violence? Does the peace that follows an atrocity somehow wash away the blood that founded it? The Tokugawa period saw incredible cultural flourishing, economic development, and relative stability for the common people. But that golden age was built on a foundation of boiled flesh and infant screams. There is a tendency in history to sanitize, to make the past more palatable by removing the visceral horror. We speak of political consolidation and elimination of rivals in abstract terms that distance us from the reality. But the reality of power is often a cauldron and a fire carefully maintained for 13 hours. The reality is that most of human civilization is built on calculated acts of brutality that succeeded in making further brutality unnecessary. The execution ground where this happened was eventually paved over. Osaka Castle was rebuilt by the Tokugawa, ironically, and stands today as a symbol of Japanese history. Tourists visit it, take photographs, admire the architecture. Few of them know about the cauldron. Few of them know that somewhere beneath the modern concrete and carefully maintained gardens lies the spot where an entire bloodline was boiled away to secure a dynasty. The Toyotomi name did not completely disappear. A few distant relatives survived, their connection to Hideyoshi remote enough that Ieyasu judged them not worth killing. But the main line, The direct descendants of the peasant who became a king ended in that cauldron. Everything Hideyoshi had built, everything he had fought for, every impossible achievement of his impossible life, came down to 8 people suspended in boiling water, screaming for mercy that would not come. Tokugawa Ieyasu died the following year, in 1616, at age 73. He had secured his family's power absolutely. His descendants would rule as shoguns for 12 generations until the Meiji Restoration forced them to return power to the emperor. But even then, even in defeat, the Tokugawa legacy was one of having created the longest period of peace in Japanese history. That peace cost 8 lives boiled over 13 hours. Every generation since has had to decide whether that price was worth paying. The Tokugawa said yes. They built monuments to Ieyasu, enshrined him as a god at Nikko, celebrated his wisdom and strategic genius. They did not build monuments to the Cauldron. They did not celebrate what he had ordered done, but they benefited from it every day for 2.5 centuries. This is the uncomfortable truth at the heart of state formation everywhere. The peace we enjoy today, whatever nation we inhabit, was almost certainly purchased with blood. Someone, somewhere, did something so brutal that it made further resistance unthinkable. We have simply had the luxury of generations between us and that founding violence. Japan eventually moved beyond the Tokugawa, beyond the shogunate, beyond the entire feudal system. Modern Japan is a democracy, a nation of laws, a place where power transfers through elections rather than armies. But that transformation was built on the foundation of Tokugawa peace, which was built on Ieyasu's strategic genius, which was built on calculated brutality that included boiling children alive. None of this excuses what happened. None of this makes it less horrifying, but it does force us to confront an ugly reality about how human societies actually function. The rule of law only works when the alternative is so terrible that no one dares to test it. The social contract holds, because at some point in the past, breaking it resulted in consequences so disproportionate that the memory still carries weight. The cauldron is long gone. The iron was probably melted down and reforged into something mundane. Horseshoes, nails, hinges. The execution ground was built over and forgotten, but the memory persisted, passed down through generations, a ghost story that was also true. And that memory shaped behaviour, shaped politics, shaped an entire nation for longer than most nations exist. Toyotomi Hideyoshi rose from nothing to rule Japan. Toyotomi Hideyori inherited that empire and lost it. The Toyotomi family was erased so thoroughly that most people today know Ieyasu's name, but have never heard of Hideyoshi. That is the final victory of the Cauldron, not just to kill your enemies, but to erase them so completely that history remembers you as the founder, and them as the obstacle you overcame. If you visit Osaka today, you can see Hideyoshi's castle, rebuilt and maintained as a historical site. You can walk through rooms where he made decisions that shaped Asia. You can stand on walls where his soldiers once stood, but you cannot see the cauldron. You cannot find the execution ground. Those have been erased as thoroughly as the family they destroyed. And perhaps that is fitting. Perhaps some memories are too dark to preserve in stone and steel, but they should be preserved in words. They should be told and retold, not to celebrate the brutality, but to remember what brutality actually looks like. Not abstract political violence, but 8 human beings, including infants, dying over 13 hours in boiling water, while the man who ordered it built a dynasty on their screams. This is how empires are founded. This is the price of peace. This is what we mean when we say someone consolidated power or eliminated rivals. Behind those clean academic phrases lies the reality of fire and iron and calculated cruelty. The Tokugawa gave Japan 250 years of relative peace. All it cost was one summer day in 1615, 13 hours long, and 8 lives that would never be forgotten by those who witnessed their ending.